Good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Kate from the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown, and I am so glad that you are here worshiping virtually with us this morning. Today is day 273 of self-quarantine. What? Apparently I'm wrong about that, but anyway, who knows what day it is anymore, right? What I do know is that I'm here in my little basement pulpit, and we've warmed it up a little for you this week. Hope you like our changes. Even though we wish we could be together at the meeting house, it really is wonderful to stay connected to all of you online. After our service, I invite our members to a Zoom coffee hour. We tried that last week, and it was a lot of fun, so I hope you can join us again. And now let us begin our worship service by lighting our chalice. And I invite you at home to light a candle wherever you are too. I promise you it will be the same light.
This is Allison and Mary Ellen from Provincetown, lighting the candle.
I'm Kat.
And I'm Chris.
And we're lighting a candle in Truro.
Good morning. I'm Elaine.
And I'm Lorraine from Provincetown.
I'm Denise Davies, lighting a candle from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Stay safe, my lovelies.
Please join us now in affirming our covenant.
Love is the spirit of this meeting house.
This is our great covenant.
To dwell together in peace.
To seek the truth in love.
And to help one another.
Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, flow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice, roots holding close, wings set me free, spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
This morning, I'd like to share a message with all of you from our own Mary Ellen Dwyer. She posted this on Facebook the other day, and I thought it was just perfect for today's service on resilience.
Good morning, everyone. My ukulele this morning. I've been thinking about the pandemic of 1918 and what it must have been like, the massive loss. And people didn't have the internet, and mail probably wasn't running, and what it must have been like to shelter in place and the isolation in those days, and feeling grateful for all the things that we have, Zoom and calls and texts, and the ways that we can keep our hearts connected to one another and all of this. And then I played this piece from Ain't She Sweet. It's from the 1920s. I'm particularly attracted to the ukulele 1920s music. And that was the post, this terrible, massive loss. And then we had the 1920s, the joy that came. People were grateful to be alive and grieving their losses, but living in their joy. So I hope today that we can be with opposites. Non-duality is about holding the opposites, holding our fear, our panic, learning to accept it and experience it and adjust. We have to adjust, and then we have to reinvest our energy in something different. And so I hope we can all do that we can move through this to the joy, but even now to hold both the joy and the fear and the pain and let it all be there. So with that, ain't she sweet? Bye, everyone.
Are you ready for a story? Today's reading comes from my favorite book, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Jo, lying on the rug. It's so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. I don't think it's fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy with an injured sniff. We've got father and mother and each other, said Beth contentedly from her corner. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Jo said sadly, "We haven't got father, and shall not have him for a long time." She didn't say, perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away where the fighting was. "When will he come home, Marmee?" asked Beth, with a little quiver in her voice. "Not for many months, dear, unless he is sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can, and we won't ask for him back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come and hear the letter." They all drew to the fire, Mother in the big chair with Beth at her feet, Meg and Amy perched on either arm of the chair, and Jo leaning on the back, where no one would see any sign of emotion if the letter should happen to be touching. Very few letters were written in those hard times that were not touching. Very few letters were written that were not touching, especially those which fathers sent home. In this one, little was said of the hardships endured, the dangers faced, or the homesickness conquered. It was a cheerful, hopeful letter, full of lively descriptions of camp life, marches, and military news, and only at the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love and longing for the little girls at home. "Give them all my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. A year seems very long to wait before I see them again, but remind them that while we wait, we may all work, so that these hard days need not be wasted. I know they will remember all I said to them, that they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them, I may be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women." You know, when I was little and I had to do a hard thing, sometimes I would pretend that I was a character from a storybook, someone who I thought was braver and stronger than me. So if I had to clean my room, which I hated, I would pretend to be Cinderella and her evil stepmother was making her clean. And we raised chickens when I was growing up, and so when I had to collect the eggs from the chickens, who were actually quite aggressive, I would pretend to be Anne of Green Gables, because I didn't think that she would be afraid of chickens at all, so I would summon her courage before I went into the coop. So regardless of our age or gender, I think that we can all place ourselves in this Little Women story. We are waiting for things to return to normal, bearing hardship, and trying to make each other proud of us. Of course, I want to be Joe, so you'll have to be someone else. Just kidding, we can all be Joe. But let's place ourselves into this story and summon the courage of these little women. Now is the time in our service where we usually gratefully receive your offering. While we can't physically pass a basket today, I do ask that you please continue to support the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown throughout this entire experience. We're really committed to paying our staff and taking care of our beautiful building while all this is going on. We're also seeing an increase in need from our minister's discretionary fund, so please give generously if you can, either in the mail or online, and we thank you. So even though our reading was from Christmas time this morning, we are actually in a very different holiday season. Today is Palm Sunday in the Christian tradition, and of course next week is Easter. And in the Jewish tradition, this week brings the celebration of Passover. And I've been thinking a lot about the Passover story this week. In the book of Exodus, we learn that long ago the Jewish people were made to be slaves of a harsh ruler named Pharaoh. The Pharaoh forced the Jews to do back-breaking labor, making bricks and building giant buildings that would bring him glory. And the Pharaoh was also paranoid, and he was deeply afraid that someday one of the Jewish boys would grow up to be king of the land. And so he ordered that all young Jewish boys be killed. Many were. But one baby named Moses was saved by the Pharaoh's daughter, and she raised him like he was her own son. When he grew up, Moses did indeed become a leader, and he warned the Pharaoh that bad things would happen to the people of Egypt if he did not free the Jewish people. But still the Pharaoh would not listen. And horrible things began to happen. 10 plagues came, one after another: frogs and hail and locusts and darkness. After each one, Moses asked for the Jews to be freed, and after each one, Pharaoh refused. The final plague was the killing of the firstborn children. To save their own children from this plague, the Jews were told to put the blood of a lamb over their door, and this way the angel of death would know which homes to pass over. And so it is told that the firstborn of all the Egyptians were killed, including the Pharaoh's son. After this, the Pharaoh finally did let the Jewish people leave Egypt. They packed quickly before they had time for their bread to rise, which is why people only eat unleavened bread during Passover. And though they escaped the army that Pharaoh sent after them, which was a miracle, they were forced to wander in the desert for 40 years before they finally entered a new land and began a new life as a community. So, Passover is a joyous holiday, but it is one that recognizes great sacrifice. The Jews gained their freedom, but many Egyptians lost their lives. Passover is also a time to remember those living under oppression all over the world. One of the traditions at the Passover meal, called a Seder, is to dip parsley in salt water to remind us that even in the best of times, there may be sorrow. And the bitter herbs are dipped in haroset, a sweet mixture of apples and nuts, to remind us that even the most bitter experiences in life can be sweetened with hope and freedom. Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, who is also known as the Velveteen Rabbi, wrote a poem called Ready. You'll need to travel light. Take what you can carry, a book, a poem, a battered tin cup, your child strapped to your chest, clutching your necklace in one hot, possessive fist. So the dough isn't ready. So your heart isn't ready. You haven't said goodbye to the places you hid as a child, to the friends who aren't interested in the journey, to the graves you've tended. But if you wait until you feel fully ready, you may never take the leap at all. And infinity is calling you forth out of this birth canal and into the future's wide expanse. Learn to improvise flat cakes without yeast. Learn to read new alphabets. Wear God like a cloak and stride forth with confidence. You won't know where you're going, but you have the words of our sages, the songs of our mothers, the inspiration wrapped in your kneading bowl. Trust that what you carry will sustain you, and take the first step out the door. When Jews celebrate Passover, they are putting themselves into the story of the Exodus. And by placing themselves into that story every year, that story of overcoming hardship, they learn to be more resilient themselves. They tell and retell the story of liberation so that they too can be brave when they have to do hard things. We are certainly in a hard time right now. Again, we are in a time of sacrifice, a time of improvisation. The symbolism of the matzah and the bitter herbs is so poignant right now. We are indeed doing without. We are indeed mixing sorrow into our celebrations. We are not being asked to step out the door of our houses. We are being asked to stay home. But it's still a step into the unknown. It's still a desert time of wandering without answers. So like the Jews of the Exodus story, we are being called to be brave. We are being called to have faith. We are being called to trust that what we carry will sustain us. We are being called to put one foot in front of the other. May we use the Passover story and every other story or song of resilience and strength that we know to get us through this time. And may we place ourselves squarely into that story of strength and resilience so that in the end, when this is over, we may be fonder and prouder than ever of our community and of ourselves. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be.
Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. You You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes. Don't you despair. Don't you despair. Look up ahead. Look up ahead. The path is there. The path is there. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. I know you're scared. I know you're scared. And I'm scared too. And I'm scared too. But here I am. But here I am. Right next to you. Right 6 feet apart. You gotta put one foot in front of the other